All right, welcome everybody to the next in our ongoing series of LSA webinars, Local Link Building, what actually works and how to do it. And I'm really excited to have Dan Leibson from Local SEO Guide and Megan Haney from ZipSprout, who's the co-founder of ZipSprout, to talk about practical and tactical techniques for link building. And I'm going to give you a short introduction, but I want to allow them time to give their full presentations and time for your questions. So we're going to have time at the end for questions. You can ask questions at any time, and then we'll start answering them at the end. Next slide, please. So for those who don't know what LSA is, you probably do because you probably got our email promoting this webinar. LSA is a trade organization that does a lot of things, education, research, events. And here's a kind of a nice logo display of the different things that we do. Next slide. One thing I want to call out, if you're selling ads to small businesses or to anybody really, we have a program, LSA Certification, that verifies that you adhere to certain ethical business practices, and it's a way to help stand out in a very, very crowded marketplace, and these are some of the companies that have been certified. So you can check that out online. Go to thelsa.org and look for that. Next slide. I'm doing a whole bunch of plugs. Normally I don't do this kind of thing, but there's a lot of stuff that I want to let you guys know about. So our next event, we just had the Place Conference in New York, which was pretty interesting for those in attendance about location analytics and online to offline targeting and measurement. Our next event is called the SMB Cloud Adoption Summit. It's for companies working in the SMB space, and it's really about what the implications are of small businesses adopting different cloud services in different verticals and how that will impact small business marketing and other SaaS providers. And that's December 7th. You can check that out on our site, sponsored by DexYT and Google, among others. SurePath Capital is also a sponsor, not on this slide though. Next slide, please. Related webinars that you may want to look at if you haven't seen them or didn't download the slides or weren't in attendance on that day. One on how to rank in Google's Local 3-Pack by Real SEO. Understanding local ranking factors, which is a very popular one with Moz and Whitespark. And those two are available. Just go to thelsa.org, Insights, Webinars, and then go to the archive, and you can watch those again. We have many others there that may be of interest, but those two are particularly relevant to this webinar. So next slide, please. I'm just going to set the stage here for Dan and Megan. Many of you know all this information, so I'm going to go through it quickly. Today, the consumer path to purchase is pretty convoluted. There are lots of different sources that people use, lots of different devices, depending on the vertical, depending on the consideration level, as many as 10. Next slide. In that process, search remains one of the prominent, most important tools that consumers use. This slide and then the next one stand for the fact that search among different local media channels has the greatest reach. Next slide. It's also perceived to be the most accurate and the most trusted by consumers. Next slide. This is kind of an excerpt from the Moz Local Ranking Factors study from this year, and what it shows, the local pack, local finder ranking factors, and then on the right, local organic ranking factors, or localized, as they say here in this list. And this is based, if you don't know the methodology, on a survey of a lot of local SEO folks. So it's a opinion survey, but it's a very, very kind of specialized audience of experts. And what you see is that links factor in both lists, especially in the localized organic list. Very important. Next slide. This is also from Moz. This is the organic list, and it shows, I've called out where links are considered to be important. So out of the, this is 11, right? Turn it up to 11. Out of the top 11 factors, links and linking represent, majority of those. Next. Link signals are one of the factors that was perceived to be increasing in importance over time, among others. Next slide. And according to the survey, quality and authority of links were competitive difference makers. Again, just sort of a general statement about how links are really important to ranking and visibility. Next slide. Local SEO Guide, which is Dan's company, also did a study with a very different methodology that was much more kind of data-centric, a lot of data points, a lot of data numbers crunched. And this chart represents a recommendation from that study about where to invest time and money to get the most ROI in terms of visibility and ranking, and linking, link building is the sort of the top one, relatively speaking. And before I turn it over to Dan, I just wanted to say the inspiration for this webinar is really the fact that I've sat through dozens and dozens of local SEO presentations, and when the topic of link building comes up, often you hear cliches or very vague and superficial presentations about church groups or Little League or some references to different local organizations, and people say stuff like, well, you can get links from them, or things that are similarly superficial. And I thought, this is so important. This material is so important. We really need to dive into it a little bit more deeply with two people who really know what they're doing. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Leibson from Local SEO Guide.
Hey, everyone. I'm Dan. I run search and product over at Local SEO Guide, and link building is a huge portion of what we actually do. Next slide. So like Greg said, right, like a lot of times when you hear discussions or see panels or read articles about local link building, it's generally kind of like about table stakes link building. Like what can you do to get a few local links from a few really low-hanging, like a few easy sources? What's the low-hanging fruit? This article that I linked to in the deck is a write-up of Greg Gifford's presentation at Brighton SEO, which is just like a great takeaway on table stakes link building. So just as like a primer for what you need to do at the very beginning in terms of like really easy link building, like stuff like a non-competitive business in a relatively non-competitive market, this will get you where you need to go. Next slide. So like Greg had mentioned, we did a large statistical analysis on over 1 million different websites that were ranking in Google My Business pack results, and looked to see kind of like what factors high-ranking businesses tended to have. These are all of the link metrics that we pulled that correlated with positive Google My Business performance, right? So like every business that's ranking 1 through 3 in a pack tended to have more of these things. This really kind of should be relatively eye-opening, because it's not just saying like, hey, links are important, right? It's the quality of links is important, right? This is measured by things like Majestic AC rank, trust flow, the trust metric, right? The proprietary metrics about the value of a link. But not just like the quality of a link, right? Like your link diversity, right? Like how many referring domains do you have? How many referring subnets? Like do you have a bunch of links from a bunch of diverse sources? Not only that, but what's in the anchor text of your links, right? Like having backlinks to your city in the anchor text and your keyword in the anchor text. Like those things like correlate well with positive Google My Business pack performance. So, even though you hear a lot that like you should be really mindful of what your anchor text is in links, and we'll get to that later, you should just know that like link anchor text is still one of the factors driving search rankings, right? So you have to focus not just on getting links, but getting a diverse set of high quality links that have some commercial anchor text, some optimized anchor text. Next slide. So that was data from our 2016 study. This is some raw data from the 2017 data set that just gathered. This year we looked at about 2 million different businesses, and so this data set is much larger, looked at much more locations than we did last year. This is the median and mean for like links to your Google My Business landing page and links to the domain that's attached to a Google My Business page. So you can see that like even at the lowest possible level, like a single location that has like a location page or a business that just links its homepage to the GMB page, the median amount of links to that page is 24, right? Like, but you can see when you look at the mean that multi-location national brands are crushing those numbers, right? Like that if you're in a business or a vertical that's competitive with any multi-location national brand, the amount of links to certain pages is going to be vastly disproportionate. And then when you look at the domains, right, you can see that like, hey, you know, the median amount of links to a domain for an SMB that's ranking in the pack, or a business that's ranking in the pack, is over 1,000. And then, you know, again, some brands are blowing that out of the water with like 2 million. And just, you know, we work with several multi-location brands. It's kind of one of our specialties. And so, you know, I can just tell you that on average, a brand will have between 200 and 300 citation links, like local directory links pointing to their location pages. And that's, you know, you can get upwards of 500,000 links from a single company just in terms of their local presence, right? So it's really important to be competing in a like really high stakes link building if you want to be able to kind of succeed in some more competitive search. Next slide. So this is an example of a client of ours that has 300 plus locations. Each of their locations is a microsite. And this is what the kind of high-level domain takeaway of their link looks like, right? Like they have over 2,000 links from a bunch of different domains. Historically, they have even more links, right? Just a significant amount of links for a single local business. Next slide. This is what my favorite local Vietnamese restaurant looks like in terms of their link profile. They rank in packs too, right? Like, and so you can see just like the disproportionate level of link strength and domain strength from businesses that are focused on link building and focused on search and those that aren't, right? And the ability for a business like Vietnam's Pearl to be able to compete with a multi-location national brand is very difficult. It would be very difficult for them to compete even with a business that's getting tons of like local links through press and some of the things that we're going to talk about today. Next slide. Okay. So since we're talking about scalable link building, I really want to point out something that like both works and doesn't. So this is an example of a private PBN, a private blog network that we had to analyze for a potential client and let them know kind of what any potential impacts were of the harm of the PBN. You can see from the screenshots on the left that I use on SEMrush, that I pulled using SEMrush, that like the PBN did great work in terms of spiking the traffic for those sites until they stopped. Right, and you can see the traffic decline of all of those sites, right? And sometimes they, you know, like the one at the top right, it hasn't gone down yet. Sometimes PBNs work, right? Like sometimes they just straight up work. But you have to be really careful when you're working with scalable link building. The screenshots on the right are just some examples of the anchor text for some of these sites that we analyzed that were being targeted by a PBN. And you can see the amount of commercial anchor text is just radically out of whack. Right, like the anchor text is dominantly commercial, and so you know that's just like a clear sign for getting either a manual or algorithmic link penalty. So it's really important that you are aware of kind of like what you're doing when you engage in link building at scale, and you're working in a way that's like not going to get a client. Next slide. All right, so here's a perfect example of low-hanging fruit. Like Greg mentioned, you know, Moz puts out a survey every year of the top local SEO ranking factors. So this is my contribution from the ranking factors from 2017. You can see that my name has a link to it. They link to my Twitter profile, but there's no link on local SEO Guy to our website. This is what we would call an unlinked brand mention, right? Somebody's talking about your company but not linking to it. This is low-hanging fruit for getting a pretty easy link. Next slide. So here are ways that you can do searches for finding unlinked brand mentions, right? You can just take various versions of these searches, do the searches in Google, pull the results, and then you have some sites to look at, see if you have unlinked brand mentions in them, and then you can build your outreach list for it. Next slide. If you don't want to like do manual searches for all this stuff, I highly recommend the Scraper Google Chrome extension. It lets you just like scrape data directly out of a Google search result through a right click. So you can set your search results to 100, like you can in advanced Google searches, do a search, get that 100, and then just scrape all of the title tag links and all of that right out of the SERP. It really speeds up the workflow. There's a link to it right there if you want to use it when you download the package. Next slide. Also, when you're starting to pull like sites that are mentioning your brand or your company or a client's company but aren't linking to you, it's really important to figure out how to get emails. Right, and so here are some of the tools that we use for email gathering. Our personal favorites are Ninja Outreach and Scrapebox, which lets you just do like text extraction pretty easily from just a large number of domains. There's tons of walkthroughs on the internet that you can find on how to actually set up the custom link extraction. It's going to be different for whatever purpose that you're using it for. You can also do custom text extraction with Screaming Frog. You know, what I mentioned before, if you're building, you know, pulling lists of tons of URLs that have unlinked brand or that have mentions of your company, and you want to see if there's a link or not, Screaming Frog can do custom text extraction. Again, I linked to a guide on how to do that. That's hyperlink on the text is. This will help speed up your workflow pretty fast. If what I'm talking about so far seems kind of like a daunting operational challenge, you should know that we're able to kind of crank through this in a way that we can at least do the analysis on whether there are unlinked brand mentions for a client, and thousands of URLs in a matter of minutes once you get the tools kind of dialed in. So don't let it seem daunting. It's actually relatively manageable. Next slide. So these next 3 slides are just going to be examples of email templates that you can use to test to see, whether or not you're going to get, it's a good email template to get a link for. It's really important to know that like a link building at a high level is really just about the ability to do research to find out where potential link targets may be, and then working to develop an outreach or content creation strategy that lets you get those links. Right, so like the most important thing to be doing is to be constantly testing your outreach messages, right? Like, so if you're doing a piece of outreach around unlinked brand mentions or like image reclamation, somebody like used one of your images but doesn't link to it, you need to be iterating on whether you're, what you're doing in terms of your email messaging, right? Whether you're testing the call to action, whether you're testing the greeting, whether you're testing the email length, or whether you're testing the subject line. You should always be running experiments on your outreach emails. Very simple goal. Your goal is only to increase your terminal metrics that like you measure your campaign by, right? Whether your open rate goes up and whether your response rate goes up, that's it. That's all you're measuring. So it's really easy to continue to run experiments around your emails. Next slide. Here's an example email template if you're linking out for somebody that uses an image of yours and isn't giving you a link to the site. This is another really easy link opportunity that you can get using all the stuff that I've talked about already. This process is exactly the same. And the benefit of doing it around images is proper image attribution on the web is a link to the site that is the source for the image. So if people are using your images without your authorization, you can even like kind of like up the aggressiveness of this email if you want to, and imply that like a link is the alternative to sending them a CME to take down their image. It really depends on how they're using their images, right? But if they're using your intellectual property without your consent or without sourcing it, then you should be following up with that and making sure it's attributed properly. Next slide. And here's just a template for both. And then, again, if you want to like work on being able to send email at scale, right? Like you can do things like testing various various text email messages out and using things like a Google Doc mail merge or various ways to be able to run through a large list of URLs and help create customized emails that you can then test and see on their efficacy. Next slide. Okay, so this Google Doc link is a spreadsheet that is to be able to be filled out with all of the data that I've mentioned so far. This Google formula is a Google formula that you can use to determine if on the place where there is a text mention, if that text mention is also a link. You just have to make sure that the columns mentioned are filled out in the template, but this will actually do the link checking for you, right? So like if you're just going and grabbing URLs that have mentions of your company on them or mentions of your like a product or something that would be an image, dump it in this Google Doc, fill out all the forms, and then run that function. It will tell you whether there's a link or not on each of those pages. A link to your client site or your site on each of those pages. So this will help you kind of speed up and iterate through the link building process pretty fast. Next slide. So like here's just some like examples of ways that you can do link building, right? And these are examples that we pulled from various client documents that we work on, right? And so like I said, link building is just research. It's like research where there are potential link opportunities and then being able to like operationalize the content creation or the outreach in order to get a result. I'm not going to talk about sponsorships too much. Megan's going to talk about that after me. Sponsorships are a great way to scale your local link building. We have a pretty robust local sponsorship program that we use. It's very, very effective, and so I definitely do not sleep on sponsorships. Pay attention to Megan's talk. Content marketing, right? This is an example of content marketing for a product engineering client, right? And so there were tons of articles about the design and the case study of various particular pieces of technology that they're developing. They get tons of links because these are academic publications that are then driving tons of content, right? And so when we did the research and saw that this is how their competitors were getting links and talked to them about it, they're like, oh, hey, we put together tons of that stuff, right? Like we have these case studies that we present with clients to do engineering design with us, but we don't ever publish them. So like a lot of times they'll actually have the content resources that you need in order to just do the outreach on, right? You don't actually have to create the content. A lot of clients will have this content for you just ready to go for their particular industry. Reputable directories. Again, like I mentioned earlier, like a typical multi-location brand will have hundreds of citations pointing to one of their location pages, right? And so you should never sleep on local directories as a method for link building. You can think of it as table stakes, which is it really is, but most people just ignore it. And especially since the discussion around citations lately has been, oh, only focus on like the top 10 or 15 most relevant citations. That's true if you're thinking about like map consistency or that kind of like that kind of view of citations. We think about citations predominantly as links. And so, when you're thinking about citations from a link building perspective, there's no reason to just focus on 10 or 15. Next slide. So some of these are pretty basic, right? Like business partners. Most people will tell you to just get links to business partners. But remember, if you're working with like a multi-location brand, that will require multiple people in the company to be kind of working politically in order to get those links, and those links are likely very high value, right? And so these are all kind of internal processes that you have to kind of kick off to get the result. And so if you're working with clients that have, that work with other brands, right, or are part of some larger organization, you need to get them to be working on their own links while you're working on the research and outreach. Resource lists, I'll get into like how a resource list can be a really good link building opportunity in a second, but just think about listicles, right? Like think about just publishing as many listicles as you can, right? Like in the web these days, we really are in a very kind of publish or perish environment when it comes to like search rankings, right? And so you need to be creating content regularly in order to be able to even just like rank for the kind of constant long tail terms that are coming up around various businesses. And so, just having that content that you're publishing in a way that is mindful and based off of search research is going to give you a whole lot of ammo to do outreach around. News media coverage, this is going to be a ton of around unlinked brand mentions, or just making sure that you do outreach to local media organizations for like potential galas or events that your clients are having, right? Like it's really important to approach link building like PR, right? Like public relations. You have to be thinking about like what your clients are doing and how you're going to be able to communicate that to the people that have the ability to give you a link. Professional organizations, join as many of those as possible, and if you're not like out there scraping for any relevant questions and answers on the web that users are asking on any variety of forums, you need to be doing that so that you can be getting your clients like products, services, and links out of it, right? Like you should be everywhere that people are talking about something related to your clients. Next slide. Okay. So I'm going to get into a few examples right now. So like this is a former client of ours, JumpShelf, a startup that does, think of it like Airbnb or Netflix or some other trite Silicon Valley startup idea, but for apartments. So they like take away all the problems of apartment hunting and they outsource that and get it mailed to you, essentially, emailed to you. So this is their core web application, right? Like this is how you find an apartment in their site in Chicago. Really hard to get links to a page like this. It's a highly monetized page, right? It's not particularly relevant to anybody that isn't looking to get into JumpShelf like lead generation cycle or use their product. So it's going to be really hard to do outreach around any type of content or anything related to this page to get the link. Next page. This is why it's important to have content, right, to be able to get links around. And so one of the things that really works in terms of being able to get links is city guides. City guides or neighborhood guides are like an amazing content resource that you can craft that are just easy to get links from a variety of resources, right? Like so there are so many local sites that cover local events, like both news, event-related, local bloggers, like niche local sites. The amount of examples is kind of endless. You just have to make sure that you're like looking to find those in a particular market and make sure that they exist and you think that you can get links for them, right? But this is where the research component comes in. And so, it became really apparent that the way to get links to JumpShelf's site was around having a series of really robust content about the cities that they were offering services in. And so through a series, there were a bunch of articles crafted. They do these city guides for every single market that they're in, every neighborhood of every market that they're in. Next slide. And this is what it looks like when you work active, meaningful outreach around that content, right? It's able to get significant amount of links. These are all high quality local links that are editorial and not not machine driven, right? And so if you can do this think if you're in every major city, right? You create, I don't know, 10 neighborhoods per city, and then you create 10 neighborhood guides and maybe an overarching city guide and do outreach around those. You can generate hundreds, if not thousands, of links for a particular market you're in just through content outreach. And then it's just a matter of making sure that you have internal links pointing to your money pages and doing all the rest of the SEO stuff to be able to drive the success of the link building program. Next slide. So here's an example of a really silly listicle, right? Like, I know you're going to say, oh, it's Home Depot. Home Depot doesn't have to do anything to get links. But like, look, this is just an article about 10 outdoor spring cleaning tips. This article is, well, next slide. This article is the most linked to page on their blog. This is the most successful piece of content that they have on their blog in terms of getting links, and it's a listicle about 10 spring cleaning tips, right? And it just shows that like what I was talking about earlier, where you have to be in a publish or perish mindset, right? So it's easier for them to get links, of course, right? But they had no idea of knowing that the 10 spring cleaning tips was going to be the post that like really took off in terms of driving link acquisition, right? And they make sure to like have internal links deep into product pages throughout that blog post, right? So they're working to leverage it in a way that they can monetize. This is really important when you're talking about doing link building for multi-location brands, right? Like the brand has to be working on their end to be able to generate the content and drive the engagement that you can do any outreach around. And then there's going to be these success stories that you weren't even planning for that just kind of take off and work to drive a lot of results, right? So it's important to think about, too, when you're talking about like a local business, especially like a multi-location brand. Home Depot has location pages, and they have an e-commerce like shopping experience. So these links that drove, that like make their location pages rank better, also likely probably drove them about $1 million in terms of product revenue, just in terms of like ranking all of the pages that they're internally linking to better and the traffic that it drove into the e-commerce section of the site, right? And so you have to really be thinking about twofers in terms of link building when it comes to brands. That's like one of the biggest ways that brands are looking to do their link building and measure it is off of increased rankings or traffic to location pages, but also simultaneously through e-commerce conversions. Next slide. So this is one of my favorites. This is so the San Diego Chargers moved from to quote-unquote Los Angeles, so they're actually headquartered where I live in Costa Mesa, California. And so this was done by Hire a Helper. They got a bunch of moving companies together when the Chargers announced they were going to move, and they just put this website together saying that all these moving companies have agreed not to move the Chargers, basically because they hate them for abandoning the city. Really hilarious idea, right? Like a total moonshot that really worked. Next slide. So this is just to the homepage. They got 225 links from 88 domains. But this thing took off and got tons of media coverage in Southern California. So these are just like the most beautiful links you've ever seen. Next slide. It's like literally like, Vice's sports subdomain, various NBC affiliates, ESPN, like all these places are giving them links just because they got together and essentially tried to troll the Chargers, right? And so it worked. Again, Hire a Helper is not a moving company, right? It just is like moving company adjacent, and their link building person or their content person deserves a bonus for this awesome idea. Next slide. So when you think about link building, like you really have to kind of like break through the kind of trepidation around like, oh, what are all the ways that I can get links? The ways that you can get links are honestly endless. What's really important is that you focus on being able to research how kind of content is getting, like what content are getting links in a particular business vertical in a particular market. Work to be able to replicate the content or the tactic yourself, and then hone your outreach so that you're constantly improving your outreach. right? Once you get the research, development, and outreach part of it done, you can do link building for around anything you want to, because it's just, SEO research, content development, and sending emails. And so just setting yourself up for like a build, measure, learn feedback loop like this, and just trying and experimenting with these various ideas I talked about will get you, maybe not from 0 to 100, from 0 to 80 pretty fast. I think that's my last slide.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Megan today, and I'll be presenting on local sponsorships, taking what some of what Dan was saying about local link building, local sponsorships, and diving deeper into the local sponsorship community and how to really find and build local sponsorships. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go on the ground a little bit with local sponsorships. As Dan and Greg said in the beginning, you hear a lot when people are talking about build local sponsorships, like, oh, just go find some little leagues, find some local hockey teams, whatever, and sponsor them, and you'll get links. That's very true, and it really does work. But there's a lot more to it than that, and there's honestly a lot more in the local ecosystem than just little leagues. Next slide. So when we're talking about local sponsorships, here's just a few examples of what the types of organizations and events that we've worked with at ZipSprout and some of the opportunities we've uncovered. So local sponsorship can be anything from, a farmer's market. It can be a business luncheon, an association, a group of people that get together that have a website for their association. It can be local fundraisers, and it can be even a group that performs classical music in homeless shelters. That's actually a nonprofit that we've worked with in Boston. And really, when you start diving into the local space, the local ecosystem, the city, every city kind of has its own fingerprint of the local nonprofits that are available and that are looking for sponsors. So, the Little League thing is kind of a broad stroke, like, hey, that's, a great way to think about it. But really, anytime you take a dive into a city, you're going to find local sponsorship opportunities that are really unique to that city. Next slide, please. So the big question is, where are they? It's sometimes it's easy to say, let's find these local sponsorship opportunities, but where do you get started? Next slide. So with us, we start with enter search engine here. Doesn't have to be Google. It can be Bing or DuckDuckGo, but essentially you're going to want to start with just basic prospecting. Next slide. So at our team at ZipSprout, we use the Link Prospector, which is one of our tools, but you can use really any prospecting tool, or if you want, you can just use Google itself or your favorite search engine itself if you want to just do some basic sponsorship finding in a particular city. And I'm going to go through a few different types of queries that you can use to find local sponsorship opportunities, just depending on how deep you want to dive and how much you're actually looking for. So, the way we do it is at scale. So we're looking for hundreds upon thousands of local opportunities in cities all over the U.S. And this might be something, if you're an enterprise, if you're an agency, that might be what you're looking for as well. If you're a smaller local business or regional business and you don't need to do that much at scale, then probably just honestly staying in the search engine is good enough. So the simplest and easiest and most basic way to start is just by typing our sponsors in quotes and then name of city. So the term, we've gotten pretty fancy with it. We've done a lot of different types of prospecting, but honestly, the most time and again, the term that really gets us the most local sponsorship opportunities, the most local websites that, link back and thank their sponsors with links is honestly just searching for, quote, our sponsors, because that means they have a page on their website where they're talking about their sponsors, and that's what we're looking for. So I would say, even just a basic query like that, and you're going to find in a bigger city like San Diego, you're going to find quite a few dozen, if not a couple hundred of local sponsorship opportunities right there. Next slide. So this is just an example of one. I'm going to give some examples throughout the presentation as well. So this is one that's actually in San Diego. And for each of these, I'm also going to show the sponsorship PDF. So as you can see, this is a local theater in San Diego. And really the cost of sponsorship for this one is actually pretty low. You know, it really can vary from city to city, from organization to organization, but you don't necessarily have to spend thousands of dollars to engage in local sponsorships. It's really about how much research you're willing to do, how much you're willing to dig into sponsorship PDFs, into the opportunities, and to find out what's out there. But, you know, a lot of times, especially these hyper-local organizations, such as, a small theater, might offer for a few $100s the opportunity to be listed on their website. You're giving them money or supporting a great cause, and you're getting that link as well. Next slide. So another different type of query you want to do if you want to branch out a little bit more, we found our donors, in addition our partners. So sponsors, donors, and partners are usually the key terms that we use when we're looking for local sponsorship opportunities in a given city. We found that with the donors in particular, that for some reason it seems like the types of organizations that use that term are a little bit more traditional. So you see a school, you see a church, a YWCA. So just know that sometimes even the type of term that you're using, whether it's sponsors, which can kind of be a grab bag, versus donors, which might be a little bit more the pillars of the community, you know, are going to find you different types of opportunities. Next slide. So here's another type of opportunity I found that was in Nashville, and this is just another great example of something that you might find. We at JumpShelf love working with local events because they're often really easy to work with, and if you get them at the right time of year, it's pretty easy to set up a sponsorship with an event. So it's a little bit hard to see this sponsorship level document, but this one, the lowest level, I think is around 1,000. You can come in. Not only are you getting a link on their website, but you're also getting a lot of other benefits of sponsorship, and you're reaching an audience of people, local pet owners, which really is a lot of different types of people. You know, there's a lot of different types of people in a community who own pets, so the audience that you're reaching here is pretty broad within the local community. Next slide. You can also query for event types. So, you know, if you do want those local fall fest or, for example, 5Ks, you know, if you want to get a little bit more specific, you can, you know, just type in city name, sponsors, and then try an event type and see if you find things that work really well for you. I really like working with 5Ks. Usually 5Ks tend to be a bit more local than your half marathons and your full marathons. People aren't really going to travel for, you know, more than 100 miles to go to a 5K. So you're getting that local crowd. You know, you're getting that hyper-local website. And a lot of times 5Ks can be just kind of fun, smaller events that are happening around town. And so the price of sponsorship is, you know, often a little bit less than it is for some of those bigger races or marathons or triathlons as well. So 5K is definitely an opportunity type that you want to look for. And actually, on our blog, on our website, we've published quite a few different opportunity types that you can query for. So yeah, if you want to email me or tweet me after the show or after the webinar, I can send you a list of a lot of different local event types that you can look for individually as well. Next slide. So here's an example of a Dallas 5K. Again, and their sponsorship level, you can come in at $500 and get not only, you know, the website recognition, but also social media recognition and even some goodie bag, you know, opportunity to put some swag in a goodie bag. So really, when thinking about local sponsorships, it's, and I'll be repeating this again, but it is much more than just getting a link. There's often opportunities that come along with the sponsorship in addition to the link that are a great way to put your brand or your client's brand out there. Next slide. So another way that you can query for local sponsorships is by audience or mission. So here we have, I chose kids as a mission. You can choose really anything, you know, cancer awareness or, you know, senior citizens. If your company is looking for a way not to just do local sponsorships, but to build a story around it, if you want to have a PR angle, like, oh, hey, we sponsored all of the local organizations in Milwaukee that helps out kids. You can query in that way as well, and that's going to help you find the local organizations that target, you know, a certain nonprofit mission or goal. Next slide. So here again is another example of an organization we love to work with, Girls on the Run, which does work with kids in local communities. So Girls on the Run is actually a national organization, but they have local chapters all over the U.S. that each have their own domains. So each of their websites is hyper-local, but they have the structure and setup of a national organization. And this is honestly one of the best types of local sponsorships to do because they've been around for a while. They're a solid, great, well-respected organization, but they also just have that local bent. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be an organization that is just local to a particular city. If it's a national organization with chapters, that can be a great way to sponsor locally as well. Next slide. So finally, you can query for industries, and this is great if you, for example, your target audience is very niche, very specific, if you're B2B, or if you have a target audience that maybe makes a certain amount of money. For example, if you're looking for lawyers in Los Angeles, you might be looking for a certain crowd of people. So that this is another way to target local sponsorships based on audience, based on a little bit more than just, oh, I want to do local sponsorships. So yeah, don't be afraid. Put in lawyers, put in doctors, put in plumbers, and you're going to find local groups of people that meet up that all fit into that industry and that profession. Next slide. And here's an example again of a lawyers association that has an annual gala that you can sponsor. This is a great, if you're looking for something local to sponsor in Orange County, but that also finds people that make over a certain income bracket, this would probably be a pretty good association to sponsor because you're getting in front of people who are lawyers. So next slide. So this is, I've gone through some of the ways and some of the types of ways to prospect for local sponsorships. So now I'm going to talk a bit about starting and continuing that conversation. Working with local sponsorship opportunities is not your typical journalist blogger outreach, and I'll explain that a bit. Next slide. So first of all, we generally start with emails, but as opposed to typical local outreach where, high touch, highly specific, emails are, the gold standard. It's what you want to do. We've actually found that keeping emails pretty short and sweet is the best way to approach local sponsorships. That doesn't mean like copy and paste an email that could, have been, that doesn't even have a name or anything. Like you do want to personalize emails. You want to address like, hey, I found your organization, name the organization, name the event that you're looking for, but it doesn't have to be 2 paragraphs on why you want to sponsor them. Over the past couple of years, honestly, the shorter our emails have gotten, the higher our response rates have gotten. It's a very interesting statistic. And I think honestly, because with local sponsorship, with outreach, you're really just information gathering. So you're not doing that final, asking for the link right now. You're just trying to find out what the opportunities are that you can sponsor. A lot of times local opportunities don't have sponsorship PDFs on their website. So you need to reach out. You need to know how much does it cost to sponsor you? What kind of events do you have going on? And that doesn't need to be a high touch complicated email. So it can really be something as simple as a couple sentences. Hey, I saw your organization. You guys look great. This is our company. We'd like to do some sponsorships. Can you send me information? And that's usually enough just to get the conversation rolling. So you also want to make sure that you're contacting the right person when it comes to local organizations, especially in the nonprofit space. There are often a lot of people involved, and this is definitely a situation where if the email gets sent to the wrong person, it just might get ignored. They might forget about it. They might never send it to their fundraising person, and then that relationship isn't going to happen. So definitely take the time to make sure you're finding the person in donations, the person in fundraising. A lot of times, if there is a sponsorship PDF on the website, they'll have an email address of the person to reach out to right on that PDF. So just take the extra couple minutes, make sure you're contacting the right person, but then the email itself doesn't have to be, all that complicated. So in an introductory email, you want to ask for a sponsorship PDF or costs and benefits of sponsorship. You just want to start off asking for information. And if you are doing this as an agency, you do want to establish, it doesn't have to be in the first email, but you do want to, before you get client approval, you want to establish who the actual sponsor will be. You want to tell the organization, hey, I'm an agency. I'm working on behalf of, Joe's hardware store or whatever. I work on behalf of Target. Target is not a client. It would be a great client to have. But you want to let them know, because we have had times, experiences where sometimes local organizations, when they find out who the sponsor is, they decline. And that can be for a lot of different reasons. It can be there's sometimes local organizations that are very particular about who their sponsors are, that say, we really only want hyper-local businesses, or, the CEO of that company is really good friends with a politician that I disagree with. And we've had all kinds of reasons why local sponsorships have been declined, and what you really don't want to do is take something all the way to your client, have everything ready to go, and then have a sponsorship fall through because the organization never knew who the actual sponsor would be. Local organizations do care about the businesses they're portraying on their website. It's a reputation management type of issue. So you want to make sure you're clearing with them who the company is that's actually going to be sponsoring them. Next slide, please. So another thing about local sponsorships that can differ from other forms of link building is phone calls. Phone calls are going to happen. If your phone number is anywhere in the introductory email, you will start to get calls. My advice would be not to avoid them. I know phone calls can take a little bit longer. Generally on our team, 15 minutes or so, is the amount of time we spend on a call, just on average. But they can really, really be helpful for establishing that relationship, because again, this is, you're talking to people who are, they care, they're attached to a certain cause or a certain event, and you're talking about giving them money. And I think anytime money is exchanged, people can be a little suspicious, and just being able to pick up the phone to hear someone else's voice on the other end of the line is really reassuring. Like, okay, these are real people. They really want to sponsor us. This isn't some sort of scam. This is a legitimate thing. So I would say if you can build in time, even if it's a couple hours a week that you schedule for phone calls, or a team member, someone on your team that's able to have these phone calls with local organizations, your list, your Rolodex of local organizations is going to be much bigger, much broader, and much higher quality, honestly. If you avoid phone calls, if you really don't want to, you will still be able to do local sponsorships. There are plenty of organizations that maybe don't need to hop on the phone, but it just won't be as many. So just know that is a thing that you might be jumping into if you're doing local sponsorship outreach. I would also say for phone calls, and a lot of the advice I'm sharing in this webinar is mistakes that my team has made that we've now turned into best practices. So one other really important thing is if you're having a phone call, especially if you're negotiating a sponsorship, do follow up with an email specifying costs and the benefits and pretty much just what you talked about on the phone call, because if then you take, the notes, you just take them and you present them to your client agrees, or your boss agrees, or whatever needs to happen, and you come back 2 weeks later. If you don't have that email record, people can forget, or someone can be out of the office and their boss doesn't like it. So you just want to kind of, anytime you have a phone call, just make sure to have that paper trail as well. Next slide. So when you're building sponsorship packages, a lot of times they are negotiable. So again, this is a great way that phone calls can really be important, because sometimes if you hop on the phone with someone, it's pretty easy to be like, okay, I know it's $500 for a booth and for the link on the website and the social media shout out, but we can't have the booth, or we can't be there for the booth. Is there any way we can get a discount? Quick, easy way to really talk about price. If you care about links, do make sure you ask how long the link will be live. Typically it's a year, but you never know. You just want to ask. And if you want to start with PDFs, that can be a way to make the process a bit faster. So if you're looking for faster turnover with sponsorships, you can just search for PDFs. Like some of the queries I was showing earlier, you can just, search for our sponsors or sponsor us plus city name plus PDF, and then you're going to be taken directly to local sponsorship opportunities that have posted their PDFs are already on their website. So just another caveat with that as with the phone calls, you kind of have to pick your battles. So if you're looking only for opportunities that have PDFs, that might only be 40 or 50% of the opportunities in a given city. So you just might be missing a lot of potentially great opportunities that just don't post things on their website. So a lot of times with doing local sponsorships, it's picking and choosing the ways that you want to be specific, and then also picking and choosing the areas where you want to put in the work. Next slide. So just general outreach tips. If you are in a hurry, if you have a client or a boss or a team that is looking for a local sponsorship link building campaign that happens yesterday, essentially, you're going to want to search for seasonal events. This is a thing that we found has been very successful. In July and August, we did a lot of outreach to fall fests. So it was a couple months out from the event, and that was when the event organizers were in, the mode of, hey, we really need sponsors. Yes, I'm going to answer my email. I'm on top of this. Because sometimes when you just do a general city search, the our sponsors plus San Diego or whatever, you're going to find all kinds of local organizations. You're going to find all kinds of events. And you might find a great event, but it happened 4 months ago. It's not happening for another 8 months from now again. And that person just might not be as responsive because they're not in fundraising mode right now. They're busy with other things. So I would definitely say if you're, if you want something more quickly, focus a bit more on, what sort of holidays are coming up, what sort of seasonal events, what kinds of parades, community events are going to be happening, and tailor your search towards those. Another outreach tip, this sounds kind of obvious, but it's, if an organization is unresponsive after a first couple of outreach emails, they're not likely to be responsive later on. So we've had experiments where we thought, well, okay, this organization never responded to our outreach email, but, we really want to sponsor them. Maybe if we just come to them and say we have the money, they'll suddenly, open up and want to be sponsored. But in general, it seems like if an organization isn't responding to you, they kind of just don't want to respond to you. So, and that can be for a lot of reasons. Maybe they have enough sponsors already. There can be a lot of reasons behind it, but I would say don't waste your time, too much time trying to reach out to local organizations that aren't very responsive. And again, make time for those phone calls. Next slide. So which organizations to choose? Maybe you have this huge Rolodex now, you have all of these options, and you're like, okay, what is the best one for my campaign? What is the best one for my brand? There really is no one that rules them all. There's not a, like, oh, if you can get this type of local sponsorship, you've really, done a good job. It really depends, and there are always trade-offs. So I would say some of the biggest trade-offs and things you want to think about are audience, time, and money. So, and you can kind of think of these in a, maybe pick two sort of situation. If you really want to focus in on audience, if you really want to find local sponsorship opportunities that hit a key target market, then you're going to have to be a little bit more selective, and you might not be as picky about money, or you might have to invest more time in having those phone calls. If you really don't have a lot of time, then you're, maybe going to have to take what you can get in a shorter amount of time effort put in, and you're going to have to spend more money. So just in general, just know that these things kind of, at the end of the day, you do have to pick a little bit, like what is the most important to you in terms of these entities. Next slide. That being said, next slide. If your biggest goal is local link building, which considering the title of this webinar and the audience of this webinar, I can't really ignore, as Greg was even referring to at the beginning, there are a lot of indicators, a lot of people who are local SEO experts have said that, not only having a lot of inbound links to a local domain, but the quality and authority of these links really, really matters. And this is especially for local organic rankings. It matters for the local pack, not as much, but so if your biggest goal is local link building, you probably are looking for some form of authority. Next slide, please. And we're talking about high authority. There are some recommendations. We're running low on time, so I'll go through these a little bit quickly. But first of all, associations, again, people who are of a single profession who get together and have drinks or have lunches. Usually those are more well established in a particular city, and they have some high authority. They can be more discerning. So these, more than any other type of local organization, a lot of times turn down sponsorships that really just don't have that connection. Like if it's a plumbers association and and you're a national bookstore chain or something. They might just say, there's not really a connection here. We don't understand why you're sponsoring us, and we'd like to decline. So just know that the caveat is that they're more discerning. I would also say if you're looking for high authority sponsorship, schools can be a great option as well. Doesn't even have to be universities. Local middle schools, high schools, after-school clubs and organizations, they have sponsor pages that live on the school's domain. And, this is America. Our schools need money. So they're often fundraising and can be, lesser expensive opportunities to, do some local good for a school and get a high authority link. Those well-established local nonprofits, these are some of the nonprofits that have been around for 30 or 40, 50 years, whose websites might be 10 or 15 years old, and again, they just have that local clout, that local authority. They're usually, have those galas that are attended by some of the city's most prominent citizens. Those usually have more authority as far as a website goes. The caveat is they can be more expensive because they're so big, because they have so much already and such an established donor base, they have no problem saying, okay, minimum sponsorship is $10,000, and that might just be a little bit bigger than your budget can afford. But there are some of those well-established local nonprofits that don't have those minimums, and finding those is a really great way to get some authorities. Link building. I'd also say museums, sort of the same thing as the local nonprofits. They've been around for a while. They're well established. Museums can also be very expensive. Sometimes museums can have event nights that you can just sponsor, 1 or 2 events at the museum, and those can be a less expensive way to work with at the museum. There are also local government entities. So if you're thinking like the city of, insert city here, often has cities have multiple events throughout the year, often the food truck rodeos and the, summer festival and that kind of a thing. And it's, a lot of times the event listing and the sponsor listing is on the government website. So you're able to sponsor that event and get a connection with a local government. I would even say an additional hint to that would be, don't necessarily just look in the bigger cities. San Diego might be a great option, but if you look in some of the suburb cities around San Diego, that's when things are going to be a little bit less expensive, and you're still attaching yourself to that Carlsbad, government website. Finally, music and film festivals, again, can be expensive, especially if you're going for the big ones, like the Tribeca Film Festival. It might be a very expensive opportunity, but there are a lot of smaller music and film festivals that, again, have been around for a while and have some high authority and often do negotiate. Next slide, please. So, final thing, fulfillment. You're going to be writing checks. A lot of local organizations just aren't doing digital payments yet. So that's another thing to consider. If at your organization checks are too cumbersome, they're just, I know sometimes that happens with companies that you have to have a 6-week process in which the accounting team is involved, then make sure you're working with organizations that accept credit cards or PayPal, but don't expect that up front, because a lot of times, people do expect good old-fashioned checks. It does take time. So local link building with sponsorships, I would say 1 to 2 hours at the minimum, could be 3 to 4 for the phone calls, getting things approved, forms, payment, and link checking. It's not, just like any link building process, it's not, there's no easy magic button to make things happen. And you also want to assign a team member to check links. So, a lot of times, once a sponsorship payment has gone through, that doesn't necessarily mean the link goes live right away, and you want to assign someone to make sure that that actually does happen. Next slide. Success measurement. So, local rankings can be one of the best ways to, check out, make sure that success has happened. One thing that we have noticed, this is actually a screenshot taken from White Spark, a client that we've actually done local sponsorships for. And you can see we did sponsorships for them around the middle of the year, around, May, June, July. And around the time that you do local sponsorships, you're going to see, because you're doing local link building, the ranking gets pretty volatile. So don't expect that you do the local sponsorships and the next day you're at number 1. The rankings will get volatile for a while, and then usually they settle down at a place that is better than they were before. So it does take a few weeks, even a few months, for the link effects to take place. Next slide. Finally, just another plug for Beyond the Link event or opportunities and benefits. So there's so much more to local sponsorships than just getting a link. They can be great networking opportunities. They can be great for a PR campaign. They can be great for a social media campaign. So yeah, if this is something you're selling to a boss or a client or a team, it can really be combined with a lot of other things that your marketing team is doing, that combining budgets and doing local sponsorships together.
Really, really great advice to both of you. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here, everybody. And we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.
Goodbye.